help her. I'm not sure she's helping. Hey, let go. So we're now at the point where we start to paint the, I've got my helper here, suspension arms. And
few moments later.
steering is reassembled and working well, so I'm pleased with that. We're now moving on to the other bit, which is the rebuild of some of the items that I took off, and we've painted some of these items, or let's call it poor man's powder coating, some of the suspension arms and the anti-roll bar brackets, and we're also working on the bolts and cleaning these up. Now you remember some of them, the threads pulled out because of the corrosion between the aluminium subframe and the steel bolts, and it does happen and it's hard to avoid. It's basically where they'll dissimilar metals and they'll corrode, and it's the aluminium that comes off worse. And what happens is, if you're unfortunate, some of the threads will stick on here, and you'll know what's happened because as you're undoing the bolt, it's tight all the way out, and it's probably because it's pulling some of the threads out. There's nothing you can do. On mine, probably 25% of them have pulled through and the other ones are alright. So what I've done is I've bought some taps, and what you've really got to be careful with the taps on these are quite, these have got quite a fine thread. Now usually at M12 it's usually something like a 1.75. What I've had to do, I've had to buy another tap, and the tap isn't really cutting the thread. All I'm basically doing is I'm just running it through to take any of the Loctite off and any of the aluminium that's picked up in the threads. So I'm not really trying to recut a new thread in it. I've then also got some M12 taps, which I'll just show you here. So basically the die, if you're not familiar, is to go on the bolt, and the tap is to go in the hole. So that will cut a new thread in the hole, or clean the thread up, we're saying. Now on one of them it's pulled out quite heavily. So what I'm going to have to do is use one of these thread repair kits, and I've used one of these before on the other Boxster. And basically what you do, you have a drill to drill the hole out slightly larger. It does seem a bit worrying at first what you're doing, but you have to drill the hole out slightly larger, which takes all the damaged thread out. Run the tap through to cut a new thread, and then you use this tool to put this helicoil in, which basically is like a thread insert, and then that gets you back to the original M12 thread that you can put the original bolt in. So I think I'm going to have to do that in one position. So I've cleaned up all these bolts, run the die down them all. I just need to run the tap through all the holes and see which ones are damaged, and I'll show you how we repair those. Okay, so we're going to have a look at these holes now. There's an M12 here and two M10s here. I think one of them is going to need some remedial work, but what I'm going to do to start off with is just try and run the M10 tap through, which of course I've magically lost. Oh, it's here now. So just put some bit of lubricant on it, or else you don't want to start cutting the threads into it. In fact, I'm just going to try the bolts first of all. Sometimes you can accidentally, no, it just feels a bit tight. So I'm going to run a tap through it. What you've got to be careful here is you don't end up cross threading it, cutting yourself another thread where you don't really want another thread. So it is a bit sort of heart in your mouth type stuff, this really. So that's that one cleaned up, and what I'll do, I'll put some anti-seize paste on that one, and I'm just going to repeat this on all 6 of them. So before I put the belly pan on, I'm just going to use some of this 3-in-1 copper slip grease on the actual steering coupling there, you can see. So I've managed to spray it all in, flooded it with WD-40, got all the rust out, got the grease in, and now it rotates nice. So I'm going to put the other, repainted these arms here, going to put the other arm on, repainted these brackets which look better. I'm going to come back to this here and put new anti-roll bar bushes in, but the roll bar is actually quite corroded, might even be past being repaired, so I might need a new anti-roll bar for that at a later point. But let's get this arm back in here, get the belly pan back on, and we're ready to go. So I'm going to put the belly pan back on now with all my new clips I've bought, so it should have all 10 clips holding it on rather than only 4. Lost one. This sort of thing makes me chuckle. Someone's come along and put a cable tie holding one of these clips on for the sake of a new nut, which is like 80 pence. So we're going to take the cable tie off. Some of the rust off there. With my finger, what likes to stay on. Just put a bit of that on there. And put a new nut on. There's a couple actually underneath here. So I'll just work my way around those. I did buy some spares. There. Honestly, why would you skimp on that? There's another one down here. Right, I'll do those and then we're done. So before we take it to a test drive, just to test the steering rack out, it's always nice to have a look at the back end and see what next is in line. And I would be saying we're talking anti-roll bar bushes, we're talking corrosion on these bars here, whether they're past it and they need replacing, or I could take them off and get them powder coated. Pullman's powder coating, of course. A bit of an oil leak up here from the RMS, I would say, because it's wet here. I can see oil coming down that gap there between the gearbox and the engine. So what I'm going to do really is just clean all this up, and the exhaust manifolds, they're pretty corroded. Well, the guy did tell me that, so I'm not too bothered about it. There's no surprises here really. It's just probably typical of a car that's spent a bit of time outside compared to my Boxster that's sort of been pampered and sat in the garage all the time. So it's, you know, it's 20 years of or 19 years of wear and tear. So it just needs a bit of cleaning, bit of a coat of paint, and I think it'll be fine. So I'm gonna get it down now, take it for a test drive. If you're ever thinking of buying these quick jacks, honestly, they're absolutely brilliant. The access you have underneath is fantastic compared to having it on blocks or ramps or axle stands. It's great. So test drive on the 911 complete. The steering is now perfect and lovely. The response and feedback is great. The only problem is, as you get with these cars, the next problem's popped up, which is a rear shock absorber, which I suspected was faulty because it was a very hard ride on the driver's side, and when I've got home it's given me a telltale sign that there's a puddle of oil on the floor and the shock absorber is shot. So unfortunately we're going to have to replace the rear shocks. I'm not too bothered about that because the mileage is 140,000, so it's probably worth doing. However, you do have to pay the Porsche tax on these parts. Cheapest parts I can find at the moment are about 215 each.